If you have a little bit different way that you're thinking about attacking some of your health systems, whether it be a good question or a good inquiry or something you read about them, to be able to get more face time, deeper, and really move, as I said to you, kind of from the waiting room where you're just throwing random messages about your product into their boardroom and have a discussion about how they do things and why they do things. You really will be able to build a moat between you and your competition.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Secrets in Medical Device Sales brought to you by the Girls of Grit. Today, we have a awesome Spotlight Series guest for you guys. I am super stoked, Cindy, because I know nothing about this. And I feel like most people don't know anything about it. So I cannot wait to have him tell us everything about healthcare economics.
Oh my gosh, it is so out of our comfort zone. And that's what makes this so exciting. And we really hope that listening today, you're going to feel that you walk away with a couple more tips and an inside view of what goes on behind the scenes that as medical device sales reps, any role you are in medical device, this is not something we think about on a daily basis. So,
Right.
yeah,
Absolutely. So
yeah.
welcome, Jeffrey DelVerne. We are so happy you are here, and we want you to give everybody a little bit of your background. Tell them kind of a little bit about who you are, what you've been doing. And you guys, today, Jeffrey is going to drop some serious knowledge bombs for y'all to be able to walk into any hospital and feel more comfortable and more confident about what you know about what goes on inside the hospital and in terms of economics and reimbursements, rebates, CPT codes, DRG codes, everything you can think of.
No, that was a heck of an introduction. Now I feel like there's quite a bit of pressure for me to perform. No, I appreciate you guys having me on. My background, ironically, is in medical device sales. I did that until 2019. And then someone was like, hey, just the way that you think and I group accounts, you should get into market access. And at that point, I said, what is it? And he said, it's a big boy job. And I said, I'll take it. And so I got into calling on health plans in early 2019. I had some success and then kind of worked into like national plans. I ended up with Centene, which is the largest managed Medicaid health plan in the country, and then Aetna, who I'm sure everybody has heard of, and then a company called Anthem, which I'm sure everybody's heard of as well. And so kind of working through that, I decided no one had ever sold Centene at our company. And so I said, I'm going to start buying their shares, attending their shareholder meetings, reading their financial reports to figure out what makes them tick. And so at that point, what I realized is they're trying to roll up as many managed Medicaids to get better pricing so that they could make more money. And so at that point, I went to them and said, you have 11 contracts with us. I will consolidate that into one if you give me all 35 of your states, and I'll give you a better deal than you have on the 11. And was able to close that transaction probably within 6 months of having them as my customer. And so what that taught me
Wow.
was I needed to know more about the largest health insurers in our country. And so I started to study what I call the big six payers. My goal is to report that out. I have a Substack. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you can join that for free. It basically just talks about those big six payers. What are their pain points? How do you solve their problems? And as I've told you before when we've met, the biggest thing is they control 90 cents of every dollar in healthcare. And so
Golly.
the more you can understand their pain points, the more you
Yeah.
can think about your customers, your hospitals, and how they're being impacted, the more you're able to sell and be successful. And so for me, I always tell everybody is as many meetings as you can generate are good. All FaceTime within your customers is good. And I think if you have a little bit different way that you're thinking about attacking some of your health systems, whether it be a good question or a good inquiry or something you read about them, to be able to get more face time, deeper, and really move, as I said to you, kind of from the waiting room where you're just throwing random messages about your product into their boardroom and have a discussion about how they do things and why they do things. You really will be able to build a moat between you and your competition.
Oh,
I love
I love
that.
that.
I mean, I
It's
mean,
awesome.
that says it right there. To go from get out of the waiting room, get into the boardroom, and
Yeah.
the amount of knowledge that you have, everything that you said, knowledge is power. And I love that through our platform here is this podcast, we try to give a lot of knowledge where it's needed. I feel that when you just talked about like having your big six payers and understanding almost to them like we do a medical device. We talk about our customers being doctors and their pain points and solving their problems. But what if you even knew more behind the scenes that's their problem too? Because a doctor's problem may be held up by one of these payers. I think that's a really good place to start. So
Yeah.
could you begin to tell us as medical device personnel, we all have different roles out here in the field, what is something that we can think about to learn, like if we're going to bring a device into the hospital, can you start with what we need to know about that device, what avenue we need to take, and just start from there as a medical device rep bringing a device into the hospital?
Yeah, I think the first thing to think about is it a high risk or low risk? Is it more of an inpatient setting versus an outpatient setting? And then what is the dollar amount, right? So as the dollar gets probably above $10,000, it's going to fall more under a DRG or a lump bundled payment. You got to also think about those as hospitals are going to think and more scrutinize those expenses related to the larger line items. And so those larger inpatient line items, procedures that are bundled under a DRG are going to get the most scrutiny. So what does that mean as a rep? You'll probably get more meetings because they want to find meaningful ways to reduce those costs. Again, think about it. Hospitals, 56% of them in the US are nonprofit, right? And they are return on invested capital is not good. It's about 6%. Think about insurance, about 12%. So double. If all of the stakeholders, whether it be a pharma manufacturer, pharmacy, they have the worst return on invested capital. So the margins in that business are very tight. You want to start to understand, is this an inpatient or an outpatient? How much is it? Is it paid for by a DRG or a CPT code? And then start to figure out where you fit within that ecosystem. That will tell you who you need to meet with and in which setting. Is it in the hospital or in maybe an outpatient surgery center?
I love
So
it.
can I?
I got a
Oh,
question. Hang on. I'm sorry, Cindy, but I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, okay, well, I know my device costs more than $10,000, right? So when I'm going to go to the VAT committee, which is the board that approves your products to get into the hospital to be used, they ask you for all of that, right? DRG codes, CPT codes, all of that kind of stuff. But they also ask you questions like, why your device over the competitors? Are you going to be replacing a competitor? Or what about your device stands out? And a number of times you always find yourself, at least I do, better patient outcomes, reduced OR times. You're providing some data to the hospital, to the board. Is that something that payers care about? I mean, is that something that they're looking at saying, well, we're going to give this great DRG code because, like minimally invasive versus open, even though open's a gold standard, minimally invasive gets the patient out of the hospital quicker, they recover quicker, all of these things. Is that something that the payer, those six big guys or gals, do they care about that?
They are typically like capping the DRG payment to that hospital. So they're saying, no matter what, we're going to bundle that and you're only getting $40,000. So if you do it for 42,000 and you lose 2,000, that's on you. And if you are able to do it for 30, that's a 10 net win for you. And so that's really where the hospital making decisions around what type of hardware and which devices they're going to use becomes really, really important. I think where you start to really have impacts is on those DRG bundles. Is the payer going to get them whole if there is a readmission, or are they eating that, right? So that really starts to get at the core of it, where you say, all right, well, we did it for 30, we used some cheap goods, we're at a 10 net win, but then we have a follow-up ER visit that costs 12, so now we're in the hole too, right, that we have to eat. So you have to really think about what is important. Well, how do their agreements structured? Is it a DRG bundled code that's capped? Does it include some of these follow-up expenses, or are you able to bill insurance additionally for those ER visits? Typically, they're probably not going to allow you to do that, right?
And that's the tricky part too, the readmission rate. And sometimes in medical device, there's different things that you sell where your company may, or maybe it's just research based from physicians, they have done studies where they look at readmission rates in hospitals. So would you say this is something that, let's say you work for a company, you can look into your clinical research articles, you're able to present knowing our device claims to do XYZ and take it further. We're also looking at readmission rates, blah, 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 because then if they're armed with their number, then this is maybe something they can bring forward when it's like Lisa's talking about, bringing it to a VAC committee to be able to say, okay, if it falls under this specific DRG, this is the clinical, I guess, research that proves it does what it says it does. And we want to prevent any further expending by readmission rates and et cetera.
You're absolutely right. I don't think they're going to let you, if you're a hospital, right, keep out on the goods, cause a readmission, and then they end up paying for the DRG that they thought was kind of a bundle. And then because you use cheap goods, you get to, as the insurance company, pay for the readmission, right? So they're typically not going to allow that to happen. They're looking at it and saying, all right, we're willing to pay for this. Here's what we're willing to pay. If the hospital messes up, I'm sure it's like a 30-day readmission. That's on you.
Yep.
And so I think when you're the hospital or health system, that's what you're weighing, right? You're saying, maybe we could go a little bit cheaper on this good and it's not going to cause higher hospitalizations on the back end? Or is it something where we maybe need to use a little bit better brand that is proven, to your point, that is going to eliminate some downside risk for us as a hospital down the road?
Yeah.
So if you don't mind me rewinding just a little bit, you mentioned earlier on about, is your device inpatient or outpatient? And then looking at whether it's DRG, CPT, whatever. And then you said, take it a step further and you know who to go to from there. So my question to you is, are there different call points or people within the hospital? Would one be admission? Would one be, I don't know, insurance? Like when you said that, where you go, what would entail the difference and who would that be?
Yeah. So if you think about like what's happening in healthcare more generally, like a lot of private equity is buying up the outpatient surgery centers. So
Okay.
in those instances, right, you're going to want to go to the CFO or anyone, maybe like a controller within that private equity or whoever is running that asset, right? So if it's, say, Tenant health system that's a hospital that owns a bunch of surgery centers, you're going to want to go to the CFO or controller or finance folks within Tenant, because not only do they own the hospital, but they own some of the outpatient assets. So you always want to know, is it more vertically integrated? Is it standalone, private equity owned, or physician owned? And then that should determine like your call point. I think if you ask some of your surgeons and say, they're going to know, right? Because they're going to have this conversation and say,
Right.
I've been wanting to use this, but they want me to use that. And I think that's a great segue to say, we've been making some innovation on this. And we think if we're able to bring some of our HEOR, healthcare economics team, and talk to some of your finance folks, you may find that there's some financial upside for you. And given the size and expense of this surgery, it might be worth 20 minutes of your time to just sit down, grab coffee or grab a lunch and talk through it, because there could be huge revenue savings for you on the back end. Whatever that conversation looks like is up to you. I think it's more, I always think of everything in hooks. And that's why I stalk for all the big six payers is like, what are they doing? So if you have big tenant and your tenant owns a bunch of systems, I would put together a mail brew at mailbrew.com that has tenant. And then say Optum Health also owns a bunch of assets and you add them to your mail brew. And then every morning at 6 a.m., you're going to get all their news feeds of Tenant and Optum Health, right? So
I love that.
you're going to be able to read and say, all right, here's what they're dealing with. Here's their pain points. Here's how I can attack them to generate meetings, to maybe dig a little deeper, maybe generate a meeting. I always think about those hooks and you say, and this is going to be a terrible way to say it, but it's probably a good way as salespeople is you need to create an audience and then you need to find the right person that can tell that person they're stupid, and it's like, it's usually not you. Unfortunately, you're usually the person that wants to tell that person they're stupid. But
But you
usually
can't.
you're not. But your
Yeah.
job is to get a meeting with that person, then figure out, all right, who is someone
Mm.
that they're going to respect and they're going to take advice or guidance or clinical data or HEOR data. And that's who you bring to the meeting. We always wanted as salespeople, like, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to, and the problem is that's usually not the right person to call them stupid. And I know that's a
Yeah.
terrible, but that's like in sales, how I think is book,
This
get
is so
in.
great.
And I'm a rambler with sales. I'm very passionate about it. So that's kind of like why I got to reading all their clippings. If I was you, I would think very similarly in your territory.
I love this. This is such good stuff. You are seriously dropping some great stuff. I mean, just the mail brew and the ideas of looking up. I mean, I'm already thinking, I'm like, gosh, I really need to learn a little bit more about this hospital system and that hospital system because I do have these. We have them in Florida, and it's really important because I've been trying to get into the VAC committee with a specific hospital, but it's a larger system, right? It would behoove me to now learn a little bit about the system and learn about how they're operating, what their costs are. Are they private? Are they public? Like, all the things that are important. And as you were talking, I was thinking back, Cindy, I can't remember if we talked about this on an episode or not, but I think I told you I was talking with one of my physicians. This goes back now about 6 months. And that physician had said to me, we are no longer taking United Healthcare patients.
Yes.
And I was like, what? And I'm thinking, why? Why not? And she's like, this is the reason why. We're finding out that they're not paying for these procedures as much. They aren't paying for them unless they're pre-qualified. So we are basically going to have to drop them because all of our patients aren't getting right. And I'm thinking, I don't know anything about this. And this is a problem because this is going to affect my bottom line because what we do together is not going to happen anymore if I can't figure out how to get to the bottom of this. So you just saying, Jeffrey, that we need to be more involved, more knowledgeable on the current affairs, the situations that are happening, doing this background check on all of these big payers and hospital systems is so important. Since then, I have done some research and I now know more about United Healthcare, and they've been in the news, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But I love this. This is such a great conversation, Cindy. I really hope that everybody listening is like turning up the volume.
Yeah, exactly. And while you are talking about the United Healthcare issue, there's probably some people out there that maybe like you were a couple months ago with like, wait, what's going on? So Jeff, can you just give us a little bit of an insight of what she's talking about, broad view, and anything that as reps going into the hospital we should know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think more generally, you're going to read more and more of these disputes, right? United obviously is financially, they pulled their guidance for the year. Their CEO has recently stepped away. They're facing some big time financial windfalls, we'll say, within their Medicare Advantage business. A lot of the reimbursement from the government on Medicare kind of shrunk over the last 2 years. Humana and Aetna have left some unprofitable markets. I think United was like, oh, good, we'll grab them. Well, a lot of those patients had not seen their PCP. They had a lot of deferred maintenance as patients. And then I think UHC walked right into that and is kind of in a really bad spot. Additionally, I mean, obviously their UHC CEO was executed. That's not been a fun thing to follow. And just the general theme and trend about United denying claims has become a very, we'll call it popular rallying cry amongst people on X, about social media, LinkedIn, whatever. I think you said earlier that it's all the stuff we're reading about them denying claims. And so when times like this get tough for them financially, I think you're going to see some scrutiny on them trying to pull in some of the spending. A lot of those Medicare expenditures, so 65 and older, are risk agreements, right? Where they're taking a flat sum from the government and they're going to try to make sure that they don't lose too much money on it. So I'm sure you'll see some denied claims. More generally, just touch on it quickly, you're going to see more and more skirmishes between your hospitals and your payers because the cost of nurses, the cost of energy, the cost of PPE for the hospitals has gone up. A lot of these contract negotiations are now new. Payers don't want to pay more for this inflation we've seen since COVID. So you've seen in the last 18 months, I have seen more of these disputes between the hospital and United, the hospital and Cigna, Aetna, any hospital than I've ever seen. And it's because They're trying to find a happy medium of, is this going to be inflation that's sticky and stays forever, or is this something that's short term? Obviously, they're going to say it's short term. Your hospital is going to say it's long term. They got to find an agreement. Usually they're resolved within 30 days. So if I was you and one of you walked in and your doctor was freaking out because they weren't going to be able to see Cigna patients, United patients, Aetna patients, I would say, calm down, doc. These usually resolve within 30 days. No one wants to lose one or the other. They both need each other. They're going to find an agreement. I
Yeah.
covered a boatload there, but I did want to touch on some of this stuff, just United more generally, and then some of these disputes we all are hearing about.
Yeah. I mean, it's nerve wracking, right? It's unnerving, not just as a medical device sales rep, but as like, I have parents that are older. I know patients that are undergoing certain things and they're having to fight tooth and nail. And then, of course, you read the stories on LinkedIn about this mother who's had to fight for her child who's struggling with this very rare cancer and she can't get anybody to reimburse her or cover her costs. And she's hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And you're like, what are these insurance companies doing? And it really paints a very ugly picture and makes them out to be very, very bad. We all know there's always two sides to the story, but at the same time, you're like, when is this going to stop? When can we see a happy medium? And when do we feel comfortable enough? Or is this only going to get worse? So it's good to know that they are getting resolved, hopefully, within 30 days for the most part. And you're right, everybody, one needs the other. We're not going to be able to operate if Cigna and Aetna and United all of a sudden just they all get together and they're like, screw it, we're not going to pay for anybody. I mean, that doesn't do anybody any good. So I appreciate you mentioning that because I think we hear a lot about that. And it's important to be knowledgeable on all this. And you cover a lot of this in your newsletter too, right? In your Substack, you talk about all this kind of stuff. And you guys, this is a really great newsletter. It's not expensive at all. It's like, isn't it like $8 a month or something like that, Jeffrey? It's like so cheap.
Yeah, I put it out there it was more like free at first, just because I want to just have sales reps or anyone calling on anywhere in the healthcare field to be empowered by the information of like, here's some of the pain points that each of the stakeholders is dealing with. Here's a way that maybe I could help them, or I could think of a way that could help it be better. Because I think everyone, does have aging parents. Everyone does want it to get better. Everyone wants, the reason you're in this industry is you could sell anything you wanted, but this is probably the one thing where you actually, if you do your job, you'll help a person not make an investment bank more money, or whatever it may be. You choose to sell this because it's usually near and dear to your heart.
I love that. And, and I really appreciate your curiosity because if you think about it, it's your curiosity that led you to research. I mean, it's kind of like you're doing this research for us, and it's so impactful and powerful in your sales process to have this knowledge and to be able to just have something to pull on more than just going in with your product knowledge. And I really hope that's what all of our listeners are getting from today. When we talk a little bit about current affairs, well, so far we've had the opportunity to talk about UnitedHealthcare. We've had the opportunity to talk about bringing in your device to a hospital. Is it inpatient? Is it outpatient? Is it DRG, CPT codes to think about? So in the broad spectrum of things, what other current affair or what other point of interest should we all kind of have top of mind or think about that could help us sales reps?
Probably the biggest thing happening right now in healthcare is just the vertical integration and like how that's going to impact people calling on clinics. Because when you think about United Health Group owns United Healthcare, and they own Optum, which owns Optum Health. Well, Optum Health is the largest employer of physicians in the US. They have over 65,000.
Wow.
So
Wow.
some of these centers
know
that
that.
you might be calling on, if they're owned by Optum Health, that may impact your ability to sell into them, right? So the decisions may not be local decisions. And I think if you think about all of our sales infrastructure, it was built before that, right? And so collaboration within your teams, within your payer people, within your healthcare economics teams, I think if you could figure out a way to meet with them as your sales rep once a month, even if it's a 30-minute roundtable, I think what you'll see is they'll be able to help you think more like them, and then maybe get some good access points into your accounts. Because I think the way that we always think in sales is like, oh, we're the salespeople. They do this, they do that. Well, you have to understand that's a 20 to 30-year-old infrastructure, the way these were all designed. And if you think about vertical integration, it was really Obamacare kind of drove that. And when that was passed back in 2010 to where we are today, it has changed the landscape. If US healthcare spending is $5.4 trillion this year, the big six payers that I write about, they're going to end up with 1.4 to 1.5 trillion, almost 30% of that money.
Wow.
Back up 10 years ago, they were getting 3% of that money, right? So they are owning PBMs, they're owning physicians, they're owning home health, they're owning specialty medications. And so you have to know where you fit. You may be trying to sell a doctor locally that has no control over
Yeah.
it. So that to me is the biggest theme. And the reason Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act drove that is the medical loss requirements, which is every dollar, 80 to 85 cents has to be spent on care. So United takes in the dollar.
Can you repeat that so we hear that and no understand that? So will you repeat that, please?
Yeah. So every dollar in premiums that United Healthcare takes in for premiums, they have to spend on the care of the patients. And so the way they look at it, they look at it and say, we can spend that 85 cents in assets we own and turn what's now an expense into a revenue stream. So if you think about Amazon, they have AWS, which is their web services. The reason they have that is they were spending so much on web services. So they turned that into a revenue source. So same thing here. They're like, hey, we should buy a PBM. We'll buy,
so tell everybody what a PBM is.
Pharmacy benefit. So pharmacy benefit manager, which is
make sure everybody knows.
Yep.
I didn't know.
Wait, I had to ask before. I didn't know either. I'm like, what is that? I'm like, wait, somebody else might not know that.
Yeah. So because they're going to spend money to provide drugs for the Medicare Advantage, they're going to use that to provide drugs for their commercial lines of business. Again, they're going to funnel that 85 cents towards assets they own. So they're going to use OptumRx to be the pharmacy benefit manager. They're going to use Optum Health where they can, which is the doctors that they own, right? And they're going to use every asset they own, LHC, which is in-home care, palliative care. The more that they can use that, it's basically funneling money to themselves. And that's important. Because you might be knocking on the wrong door and you're like, I've never been able to get anywhere with this account. And then someone says, well, we got bought by Optum 2 years ago. You may be able to connect with someone in your payer team that has a relationship with Optum who says, let me reach out to Ryan, who I work with at Optum, and see if we can't get a meeting on the books to talk about why this will add value. So I think knowing some of that, the other thing I think is the tighter you get within your org, the better. Whereas before you could operate in a silo, I feel like now you need collaboration more than ever.
This is awesome, dude. I don't want this to end. Oh my gosh.
No, I appreciate you having me on. I always think about like the organizations that I've worked for, right? We have sales and then like everybody else. And sometimes we don't get brought all together to help each other. Because then I think there's the work backwards where you guys run into someone at a grocery store that's like, oh, I run all the finance for Tenant Health and he lives in your neighborhood, right? And then your payer guy has been dying to meet with him and now you're the introduction. So I think it works both ways.
Networking.
Keep your ears to the ground. I love this. This is so awesome. We're going to have you back on again, Jeffrey. I'm just saying. We're just having you back on.
I'm serious. But if anybody else is feeling the way Lisa and I are, and they just want to get more right now, Jeff, can you tell us where everybody can find you and your newsletter?
Add me on LinkedIn. I usually like to put it all out there just to make sure. It all started, I was at a company where my boss was kind of like not as diligent. And so he would be saying, Medicaid's going to continue to grow. Well, then I was reading, my mail brew of like, it was like Medicaid's going to shrink because they're going to like start to kick people off of post-COVID Medicaid. So then I was like, I need to make sure my management team knows some of this stuff. So I put it out on LinkedIn and then I would have them follow me on LinkedIn and then go on Substack and look for the healthcare economy. I write about those big six payers. I write a lot about digital health. I sometimes get lost in some detailed finance stuff, but for the most part, it is healthcare focused. And I really love you guys having me on. The coolest thing about meeting you is you're trying to like help people. Like, I think, the biggest thing that I think about is like, what's your legacy? What are people going to say about you? And I think for you
Oh,
all, it's like, you're now making me a listener, and then you're going to influence me, right? And beyond the grave, you'll have given me a pearl or two, right? So I think,
oh,
Well, thank you.
what you're
thank you.
doing is really probably one of the neater things. When you guys were telling me about it when we had met, just my mind was blown, and so was my partner Amy. We both were like, that is the coolest quest. And I think you guys should keep it up and make sure you keep following your dream, because I think it's gonna work out well for both of you.
Well, thank you. We hope so.
Thank
I mean,
you.
it was born out of the fact that we had no support. And we're like, we are going to help everybody else know they're not alone and they have all the support in the world here on the Secrets of Medical Device Sales podcast. So thank you. Before you go, though, you are so smart in your ways and you're very curious, which makes you an amazing leader. Can you tell us, and I didn't even let you know that I was going to ask you this, but can you tell us maybe one or two books that you are either currently reading or that you have read that has made such an impact in your life that you would love to share with our listeners?
Yeah, my favorite by far, and it's usually number one on every business book list, is Zero to One by Peter Thiel. And so I'm sure you guys have probably read it. And then obviously I like Ray Dalio. Principles is a really good one that kind of
I haven't
changed
read
my
that.
life. He was just like one of the better equity traders, just has a really interesting philosophy about how he thinks about life. And I guess I'll pose the question to you. I usually try to read like 40 to 50 business books a year. So
That's
what
awesome.
is give me both your top two and let me grab a pen.
Yeah. So my favorite is from a long time ago. It's Your Ship. And it's
Mm.
actually about leadership. Have you read it? The
Yeah,
Navy. Yeah,
yes. I
that's a
actually read
great
it
one. So for
4 years
listeners,
ago.
there's something real and grounding about that. It comes to mind a lot when certain situations happen. It's a great book for everybody to read. It's called It's Your Ship.
Yeah, you've told me about that, Cindy, and I have absolutely read that. The one I'm reading right now is Be the Unicorn, because I think that there are certain people in the world that have that it quality. And I am
Mhm.
so curious on what that it quality is and if I have it, right? Everybody wants to know if they have the it quality. So this book kind of outlines how to be the unicorn and those it qualities. So I've enjoyed that. And then of course the Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. That might be like
Oh,
my favorite book
yeah.
of all time just because I love her. But it's a lot of fun. And I love that you read so much. Cindy and I talk about that a lot. We share books back and forth. It's so important to be curious. It's so important to continue learning, stay knowledgeable. And this conversation today, Jeffrey, has really incentivized me to do more research and to really make myself more knowledgeable when I have these conversations with the people at the top, not just the VAC committees, but the CEOs and the CFOs. And it's funny because as I've gotten older in my career, I find myself actually having conversations with these people that I never thought I would have had 10 years ago. So I loved our conversation today.
I
Thank you so
know.
much.
Me too. Thank you, Jeffrey. This was so awesome. And I really hope our listeners enjoyed something different today. And we
Yes.
hope you took a lot of knowledge home. So we can't thank you enough.
No, thanks for having me on there. Probably like that was really boring compared to my usual sales stuff, but most people are payer stuff is really boring. So that's funny.
Awesome. It was awesome. It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you.
you.